Hi and welcome to my channel.
It was a regular Tuesday morning in Hartford, Connecticut, cold but clear skies. My husband, Daniel, was already at work by the time I poured my first cup of coffee. He's 38, an accountant with a sharp mind for numbers, though his passion often felt like it was more for his spreadsheets than for me. I'm Alicia, 35, a real estate agent whose days are spent showing homes to strangers and trying to convince them to fall in love with places they barely know. Life was predictable. Too predictable. Our routine had become our cage. Daniel left at 7:30 a.m. sharp each morning, armed with his briefcase and coffee to go. I stayed home until my first showing, sipping coffee in my bathrobe, scrolling through the local listings for updates on the market. We text occasionally, short, practical updates like, "Don't forget to grab milk," or "The plumber's coming at 3." It wasn't bad, just mechanical. The cracks in our marriage weren't glaring. They were subtle, like the way he'd stopped noticing when I dressed up or the way I didn't ask how his day was anymore. We'd always been careful with our money, but that was part of the problem. Everything felt so planned, so controlled. Our $350,000 suburban home with the perfectly manicured lawn was paid down significantly, thanks to Daniel's obsessive budgeting. Yet every time I looked at it, I felt empty. The house, the cars, the savings. It was all a monument to our diligence, but devoid of passion. That morning, something shifted. It wasn't monumental, a slight tremor, really, but I felt it. I got a message from a new client, Liam B. He'd been interested in a property on the outskirts of town, a sprawling estate, old but elegant. "Can we meet today?" The text read, followed by a smiley face emoji. Innocent enough, right? But something about it sparked a feeling I hadn't had in years, excitement. We arranged to meet at noon at the estate. When I arrived, the winter sun was casting a golden glow over the large brick facade. Liam was already there, leaning casually against a sleek black car that screamed, "Money." He looked mid-40s, tall and fit, dressed in a tailored coat. His presence was magnetic. I felt it instantly, a pull I hadn't anticipated. "Alicia?" he asked, his voice smooth and confident. "That's me," I replied, extending a hand. His grip was firm, warm. I pulled away quickly, maybe too quickly, suddenly hyper-aware of the ring on my finger. As we toured the estate, Liam peppered me with questions, not just about the house, but about me. Where was I from? Did I enjoy my job? What made me start in real estate? At first, I answered automatically, sticking to polite, professional responses. But he had this way of looking at me, like he was genuinely interested in what I had to say, and before I knew it, I was laughing at his jokes and sharing little anecdotes I hadn't thought about in years. The house was incredible, high ceilings, original hardwood floors, a fireplace that dominated the living room, but it was clear Liam wasn't there just for the property. By the time we wrapped up, I realized we'd been talking more than house hunting. As I walked him out, he turned and said, "You know, I almost canceled this meeting today, but I'm glad I didn't." There was a moment, just a moment, where I felt like I was standing on the edge of something, but I shook it off. "Well, let me know if you'd like to schedule another showing," I said, keeping my tone professional, though my heart was pounding. "I will," he said with a smile. "And Alicia? Thanks for today." The ride back to my office felt surreal. I replayed the meeting over and over, analyzing every word, every glance. By the time I got home that evening, I felt like I'd lived 1,000 lives in the span of a single afternoon. Daniel was already home, sitting at the kitchen table with his laptop open, crunching numbers as usual. "Hey," he said without looking up. "Hey," I replied, setting my keys down. I made dinner while he worked, the familiar silence between us now feeling louder than ever. As I lay in bed that night, staring at the ceiling, my phone buzzed on the nightstand. It was a message from Liam. "Thanks again for today. Let's do it again soon." I didn't respond right away, but I didn't delete it either. For a few days, I didn't reply to Liam's text. I'd see it whenever I unlocked my phone, a quiet reminder of something unspoken. Part of me thought ignoring it would make the whole encounter fade into the background, but another part, one I wasn't ready to admit existed, waited for the perfect excuse to reach back out. That excuse came Friday morning. I was scrolling through my emails when I noticed a listing update for the estate. The seller had decided to drop the price by $20,000. It was a legitimate reason to contact Liam, right? Purely professional. I composed a quick message. Hi, Liam. I wanted to let you know the estate you toured has just had a price reduction. Let me know if you're interested in a follow-up showing. Alicia. I hit send before I could overthink it. His reply came almost instantly. Funny timing. I was just thinking about you. Let's meet tomorrow. Same place. I told myself it was fine. Normal. I had other clients I met repeatedly. It was part of the job. But the flutter in my stomach as I typed back, sure, see you at noon, told a different story. The next day, I left the house earlier than necessary, blaming traffic, but really, I wanted extra time to prepare. I spent longer than usual on my makeup and debated over which coat to wear, silly details that made me feel like I was heading out for a date rather than a showing. Daniel was running errands with his buddy, oblivious, which only made it easier. When I arrived at the estate, Liam was already there, leaning casually against the same black car. This time, he wasn't alone. A stunning woman, blonde and effortlessly elegant, stood next to him, laughing at something he said. My stomach sank. You're early, Liam said when he spotted me. He gestured to the woman. Alicia, this is Vanessa, my sister. Relief washed over me, though I immediately chastised myself for the reaction. Why did I care if he had someone with him? Still, I smiled and extended a hand. Nice to meet you, Vanessa. Vanessa didn't stay long. She had other plans, as she put it, and drove off after a few polite words. That left Liam and me alone again, the tension from our first meeting lingering in the crisp winter air. The showing went quickly. He seemed less interested in the house this time, more in the conversation. We strolled through the sprawling yard as he asked about my work, my life, and Hartford itself. I kept my answers vague, careful not to reveal too much, but he had a way of pulling more out of me than I intended. Finally, as we stood by the property's pond, he said, You don't have to play it so cool, you know. I blinked. What do you mean? He turned to face me fully, his hands in his pockets. You're fascinating, Alicia. I can't stop thinking about you. I froze. The words hit me like a freight train, not because I didn't expect them, but because hearing them out loud made them real. Liam, I started, but he held up a hand. I'm not trying to complicate your life, he said softly. I just needed to say it. I see the way you carry yourself, the way you talk about your work, your life. There's something missing, isn't there? His words struck a nerve I hadn't known was raw. I swallowed hard. That's not something you need to worry about. He smiled a little sadly. Maybe not. But if you ever want to talk, I'm here. The drive home was a blur. I replayed his words over and over, feeling equal parts exhilarated and terrified. By the time I pulled into the driveway, Daniel's car was already there. I walked into the house, greeted by the smell of whatever he'd thrown together for dinner. Probably something simple like pasta. He called out from the kitchen, Hey, how was your day? Good. I lied, setting my purse down. Busy. I tried to focus during dinner, but my thoughts kept drifting. Was Liam right? Was something missing? I looked across the table at Daniel, his face bathed in the soft light of the kitchen, and felt an overwhelming wave of guilt. He was a good man, reliable and steady, but the spark that had once defined our relationship was long gone. And now, here I was thinking about someone else, someone who saw right through me. After Daniel went to bed, I sat alone in the living room, the house silent except for the hum of the heater. My phone buzzed. Another text from Liam. I meant what I said. You don't have to feel so alone. This time, I didn't hesitate. I typed back. Thanks, Liam. Today was nice. The second I hit send, I knew there was no going back. The next morning, I woke to a string of mundane texts from Daniel, reminders about the car needing an oil change, the weekend grocery list, and a note about his mom visiting the following weekend. His messages were exactly what I expected, routine and practical. They weren't bad, but they felt hollow compared to the electric pulse I'd felt reading Liam's words the night before. I deleted Liam's text thread out of guilt, but couldn't stop replaying our conversation at the estate. His words lingered. You don't have to feel so alone. I hadn't even told him I felt alone, yet he knew. At work, I kept busy with back-to-back showings and a lunch meeting with a potential seller. I was halfway through my second cup of coffee when Liam's name lit up my phone. The message was simple. Dinner tonight? Just us. No talk of houses. I stared at it, my mind racing. There was no reason to say yes, no professional reason at least. But there was every personal reason to go. I typed back, I can't tonight, but hesitated before hitting send. Something about the idea of seeing him again, of stepping out of my carefully constructed world, felt like a lifeline. Instead, I replied, Where? We met at a restaurant in downtown Hartford, a quiet, upscale spot where no one I knew would likely run into me. I'd changed into a simple black dress and a pair of heels, telling Daniel I had a late showing that might turn into drinks with a colleague. He didn't question it. Liam was waiting when I arrived, looking effortlessly handsome in a navy blazer and open-collared shirt. He stood as I approached, pulling my chair out for me like we were in some old-fashioned movie. You look stunning, he said, his voice low enough to make my stomach flip. Thanks. I managed, trying to sound casual. The waiter came quickly, and we ordered wine. I noticed Liam didn't even glance at the prices on the menu. I'd grown so used to Daniel's budgeting habits, carefully scanning for deals, calculating tips down to the cent, that Liam's carefree approach felt almost intoxicating. Conversation flowed easily. He told me about his business, some kind of financial consultancy that worked with high-net-worth clients, and his childhood, which sounded like it came straight out of a Kennedy family playbook. Summers on Cape Cod, boarding school in New England. I shared bits of my own life, carefully leaving out details about Daniel or my marriage. Somehow, talking about myself felt easier than it had in years, like I was peeling back a layer of armor I didn't even realize I was wearing. The wine loosened my nerves, and by the time our entrees arrived, I found myself leaning in closer, hanging on his every word. He had this way of making everything feel significant, like the world shrank down to just the two of us at that table. So, he said, his tone turning serious, are you happy, Alicia? The question caught me off guard. I hesitated, swirling the wine in my glass. What do you mean? In your life, he pressed. Your job, your marriage, everything. Do you feel like this is it for you? That you're living the life you're supposed to? I laughed nervously, trying to deflect. That's a pretty deep question for a second meeting. Maybe, he said, smiling softly, but I think it's worth asking. I stared at the tablecloth, suddenly unable to meet his gaze. I don't know, I admitted. I think I used to be happy, but now, I'm not sure. Liam nodded, like he understood completely. You deserve more, Alicia. You deserve to feel alive. His words hung between us, heavy and charged. I didn't know what to say. He reached across the table, brushing his fingers against mine. It was such a small gesture, but it felt monumental, like crossing an invisible line I couldn't uncross. When I got home that night, Daniel was already asleep on the couch, a game still playing on the TV. I stood in the doorway for a moment, watching him. He looked so peaceful, so content. For the first time, I felt like I didn't belong in the picture. I turned off the TV and covered him with a blanket before heading upstairs. In the bedroom, I checked my phone. Another message from Liam. I'm glad you came tonight. I didn't reply. I just stared at the screen, my heart pounding. This wasn't who I was, or at least it wasn't who I thought I was. But something about Liam made me question everything, and the thought of going back to normal, to routine, felt suffocating. As I lay in bed that night, I realized I was standing on the edge of a decision that could change everything. The question was, did I have the courage to jump? The days after dinner with Liam felt like I was living two lives. By day, I was Alicia, the dependable wife, the reliable real estate agent, the woman everyone could count on. But in stolen moments, in glances at my phone, I was someone else entirely, someone braver, someone reckless. Someone who answered Liam's texts with a thrill instead of dread. Our messages became more frequent, a rhythm that felt natural and impossible to resist. He'd ask about my day, sending witty remarks and compliments that made me smile at my phone like a teenager. I started checking my messages obsessively, my heart skipping every time his name popped up. Daniel, as usual, was oblivious. His world revolved around his job, his spreadsheets, and his carefully calculated plans. He never asked about my late nights or questioned my sudden bursts of energy after reading Liam's texts. It made me angry in a way I couldn't explain. How could he not notice that I was slipping away? The next time I saw Liam, it wasn't planned. I was out running errands when I spotted his car parked outside a cafe near downtown. He was sitting by the window, engrossed in something on his laptop. I hesitated for a moment before walking in, my pulse quickening with every step. When he saw me, his face lit up. "Alicia," he said, standing to greet me. "What are the odds?" "I could ask you the same thing," I replied, trying to keep my voice steady. "Join me," he said, pulling out a chair. "Unless you're in a hurry?" I wasn't. At least, that's what I told myself. I slid into the chair, suddenly hyper-aware of how close we were. The cafe was cozy but crowded, the hum of conversation and clinking coffee cups providing a layer of anonymity. "What are you working on?" I asked, gesturing to his laptop. "Nothing that can't wait," he said, closing it with a smile. "I'd much rather talk to you." We spent the next hour chatting, the conversation as easy as ever. But this time, there was an undercurrent of something more, something unspoken but palpable. When I finally stood to leave, Liam reached out, his fingers brushing mine. "Let me walk you to your car," he offered. I should have said no, but instead, I nodded, and we stepped out into the crisp winter air. My car was parked a block away, and we walked in silence, the tension between us growing with each step. When we reached it, I turned to thank him, but the words caught in my throat. Liam stepped closer, his eyes searching mine. "Alicia," he said softly, "I don't want to overstep, but—" He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't have to. Before I could think, before I could stop myself, I closed the distance between us. His lips met mine, warm and insistent, and for a moment, the world fell away. It was just us, standing in the middle of a quiet street, everything else fading into the background. When we finally pulled apart, I was breathless. "I shouldn't have done that," I whispered, though I wasn't sure if I meant it. "I don't regret it," he said, his voice steady. "And I don't think you do either." I didn't answer. Instead, I got into my car and drove away, my mind racing. The kiss had been a moment, a fleeting, stolen moment, but it felt like a line had been crossed. One I couldn't uncross, no matter how hard I tried. At home, Daniel was in the kitchen, stirring a pot of spaghetti sauce. "You're back late," he said, glancing up. "Everything okay?" "Yeah," I said quickly, avoiding his gaze. "Just got caught up with work." I couldn't look at him, couldn't let him see the guilt that was written all over my face. Instead, I busied myself setting the table, the weight of what I'd done pressing down on me. That night, lying in bed next to Daniel, I stared at the ceiling, replaying the kiss over and over in my mind. It had been so brief, so impulsive, but it had changed everything. I knew I was standing on the edge of something dangerous, something that could unravel the life I'd spent years building. But instead of pulling back, I found myself leaning in. The days after the kiss were a blur of conflicting emotions. Guilt and exhilaration battled for control, and no matter how hard I tried to focus on work or home, Liam was always there, in my thoughts, in my phone, in the quiet moments when I felt most vulnerable. Liam didn't press me, though. His texts were measured, never pushy, like he knew I needed space to figure things out. "Thinking about you," he wrote one afternoon. That was it, no demands, no expectations. Just those 3 words. But they hit me harder than I expected. The following week, Daniel announced he'd be working late on a big client's audit. "Don't wait up for me," he said over breakfast, his tone as matter-of-fact as ever. I nodded, trying to hide the flicker of relief that crossed my face. As soon as he left, I texted Liam. "Free tonight?" His reply came instantly. "For you? Always." We met at a boutique hotel on the outskirts of Hartford, far enough from prying eyes but not so far as to arouse suspicion. Liam had booked a suite, tastefully understated, with soft lighting and a view of the city skyline. When I walked in, he was already there, pouring 2 glasses of wine. "You look beautiful," he said, handing me a glass. His eyes lingered on mine, warm and inviting, but also searching, like he was waiting for me to make the next move. I took a sip of wine, my hands trembling slightly. "This feels surreal," I admitted. "Good surreal or bad surreal?" he asked, his tone light but his gaze serious. I didn't answer. Instead, I closed the distance between us, my lips finding his in a kiss that felt like both a confession and a surrender. He didn't hesitate, pulling me closer, his touch steady and assured. For the first time in years, I felt seen, wanted. It wasn't just the physical connection, it was the way he looked at me, like I was the only thing in the world that mattered. The hours we spent together passed in a haze. We talked more than I expected, about everything and nothing, our childhoods, our fears, the things we wished we'd done differently. Liam had this way of peeling back the layers, making me feel like I could tell him anything without judgment. At one point, as we lay on the plush hotel bed, he turned to me and asked, "Why do you stay?" The question caught me off guard. "Stay where?" "In your marriage," he said gently. "With him." I stared at the ceiling, the weight of his words settling over me. "Because it's safe," I admitted finally. "Because it's what I know. And because it feels like the right thing to do." "But does it make you happy?" he pressed. I didn't answer, because I didn't know. Or maybe I did, but I wasn't ready to say it out loud. By the time I left the hotel, the sky was dark, the city lights casting a soft glow over the streets. I drove home in silence, the events of the evening playing on a loop in my mind. Part of me felt like I was floating weightless and free. The other part felt like I was plunging into something I couldn't control. When I walked into the house, Daniel was still at work. The silence was deafening. I went to the kitchen, poured myself a glass of water, and stared at the reflection of my own face in the window. I barely recognized the woman staring back at me. That night, as I lay in bed next to Daniel, my phone buzzed on the nightstand. A message from Liam. "I'm here whenever you need me." I stared at the screen, my heart pounding. I wanted to believe that I could keep this separate, that Liam could be my escape without destroying everything else in my life. But deep down, I knew it wasn't that simple. I had crossed a line, and there was no turning back. The days that followed felt like a delicate balancing act. On the surface, life went on as usual, breakfasts with Daniel, work appointments, and mundane conversations about bills and grocery lists. But beneath the facade, my mind was consumed by Liam. Every text, every stolen moment felt like a secret rebellion against the monotony of my life. Liam was patient, though. He never pushed, never demanded more than I was ready to give. It was his restraint that made me want him even more. It was intoxicating, the way he seemed to understand exactly what I needed without me having to say it. Then came the complication, money. It started innocuously enough. I'd mentioned a listing I was struggling to sell, a fixer-upper in a less desirable neighborhood. The commission would be solid, but it had been sitting on the market for months. "Send me the details," Liam had said during one of our late-night conversations. "Maybe I'll take a look." At first, I thought he was joking, but a few days later, he followed up. "I've been thinking about that property. Could be a fun project. Want to show it to me?" It felt too convenient, too calculated. But I brushed aside my doubts and arranged the showing. We met at the property on a cold, gray afternoon. The house was a classic New England colonial, charming but in desperate need of updates. Liam arrived in his usual effortless style, wearing a wool coat and scarf that looked more suited for a magazine cover than a property tour. "So, this is it," I said, gesturing toward the peeling paint and sagging porch. "Not exactly your usual taste." He smiled. "It's not about the house. It's about helping you." I blinked. "Helping me?" He shrugged, stepping closer. "I know how hard you work, Alicia. You deserve a break." The words were kind, but they hit me wrong. "Liam, I don't need charity," I said, my voice sharper than I intended. "This isn't charity," he replied calmly. "It's an investment. And maybe a way to spend more time with you." I hesitated, my instincts warring with a pull I felt toward him. "You don't have to do this." "I know," he said, his tone soft but firm. "But I want to." By the time we left the property, Liam had already decided to move forward. He called his lawyer on the spot to start the paperwork, leaving me feeling equal parts grateful and unsettled. That evening, I sat at the kitchen table, staring at the numbers in my client database. The commission from Liam's purchase would be enough to cover our upcoming property taxes, which Daniel had been quietly stressing about for weeks. I told myself it was a win, a practical solution to a practical problem. But deep down, I knew it was more than that. Liam wasn't just buying a house. He was embedding himself further into my life, blurring the lines between personal and professional in ways I couldn't ignore. When I told Daniel about the sale later that week, he barely looked up from his laptop. "That's great," he said, his tone distracted. "We could use the extra money." I waited, hoping for a follow-up question, something that showed he cared about how I'd managed to sell a house that had been sitting for months. But it never came. He just returned to his spreadsheets, leaving me feeling more invisible than ever. A few days later, Liam texted me, "Drinks tonight? Celebrate the sale?" I stared at the message, my stomach twisting. Things were moving too fast, getting too tangled. But the thought of seeing him again was too tempting to resist. I replied, "Where?" The bar he chose was intimate and upscale, with dim lighting and plush leather booths. When I arrived, he was already there, a glass of whiskey in front of him. He stood as I approached, kissing my cheek in a way that felt both casual and possessive. "To new ventures," he said, raising his glass. "And to you." We talked for hours, the conversation flowing as easily as the drinks. At one point, he leaned in, his voice dropping to a whisper. "Alicia, you know this doesn't have to stop here." I met his gaze, my heart pounding. "What do you mean?" Us," he said. "It doesn't have to just be moments stolen here and there. I can give you more. A life where you don't have to settle." His words sent a chill down my spine. "Liam, I can't just walk away from my life." "From Daniel?" "Why not?" he asked, his tone gentle but insistent. "Does he even see you the way I do? Does he make you feel alive?" I didn't answer. I couldn't, because I knew he was right. That night, as I drove home, Liam's words echoed in my mind. The money, the moments, the connection, it was all leading somewhere. Somewhere I wasn't sure I was ready to go. But the pull was undeniable. The morning after our celebratory drinks, I woke up with a nagging unease. Liam's words, his offer of more, played on a loop in my mind. He wasn't just asking me to keep sneaking away to meet him. He was asking me to imagine a different life entirely, a life where he was more than just an escape. Daniel noticed my distraction over breakfast. "You're quiet," he said, looking up from his phone. "Just tired," I replied, forcing a smile. "It's been a busy week." He nodded absently, already scrolling through emails. "You're doing great. I'm proud of you." The words were kind, but they felt hollow, perfunctory. I wondered if he would still say them if he knew what I was really doing during my busy weeks. The sale of the fixer-upper closed quickly. Liam had his team of lawyers and contractors handle everything, leaving me with a generous commission deposited into my account. When I told Daniel, he beamed, relief written all over his face. "This is amazing," he said, pulling up our joint budget on his laptop. "This covers the property taxes and gives us a cushion for next month." I nodded, biting my lip to keep from blurting out the truth, that the sale wasn't just a stroke of professional luck, that it had been orchestrated by a man who was slowly unraveling the life we'd built. Daniel didn't ask for details. He didn't even wonder why someone like Liam would buy a house like that. He trusted me completely. The realization made my chest tighten with guilt. Liam, on the other hand, didn't let me off so easily. "Dinner," he texted a few days after the sale. "No celebrations this time. Just you and me." I hesitated, staring at the screen. Things were getting too serious, too complicated. But the thought of turning him down felt impossible. I needed him. Not just the way he made me feel, but the way he made me question everything about my life. "Okay," I replied finally, but somewhere quiet. He chose a private dining room at an exclusive restaurant downtown. When I arrived, the table was already set with candles and wine. Liam stood as I approached, his expression soft but intense. "You came," he said, his voice low. "I shouldn't have," I admitted, even as I let him take my coat. "But you did," he said, his gaze never leaving mine. "And that's what matters." The dinner was quieter than our previous meetings, the conversation heavier. Liam didn't press me with big questions or declarations this time. Instead, he asked about my childhood, my dreams, the things I used to love before life became a series of obligations and routines. "You light up when you talk about the past," he said, leaning closer. "But when I ask about now, you close off. Why?" I stared at my wine glass, my throat tightening, because now isn't what I thought it would be. "And what do you want it to be?" he asked, his voice gentle. I don't know, I whispered. I don't even know who I am anymore. Liam reached across the table, his hand covering mine. I know who you are, and I know what you deserve. When I got home that night, Daniel was waiting for me in the living room. His laptop was closed, and he had 2 glasses of wine on the coffee table. Thought we could have a quiet night, he said, smiling. Just us. The gesture was sweet, but it felt like a cruel joke after the evening I had just had. I sat down beside him, forcing a smile as he handed me a glass. How's work? He asked, his tone casual. Good, I said automatically, avoiding his gaze. Busy. He nodded, taking a sip of wine. I was thinking we should take a trip this spring. Just the 2 of us. Maybe rekindle some of that old spark. I froze, guilt crashing over me like a wave. That sounds nice, I managed, my voice trembling. Daniel reached for my hand, his touch warm and familiar. I love you, Alicia. I know things have been routine, but I want us to be happy. Really happy. I stared at him, my heart breaking. He meant every word, and for a moment I almost believed we could fix things. But then I thought of Liam, of the way he made me feel alive in a way Daniel never could anymore. I love you too, I said, the lie tasting bitter on my tongue. That night, as Daniel slept beside me, I stared at my phone, Liam's number glowing on the screen. I knew I should end it, cut ties before it was too late. But instead, I typed, I don't know what to do. His reply came almost instantly. Let me help you figure it out. I put the phone down, my hands shaking. I was standing at a crossroads, and no matter which path I chose, someone was going to get hurt. The morning after I sent Liam that message, I woke up to another text from him. I mean it, Alicia. You don't have to figure this out alone. Let's talk. I stared at the screen for what felt like an eternity. Part of me wanted to ignore him, to shut the door on whatever this was before it spiraled further out of control. But another part, the part that felt starved for connection, couldn't let go. Tonight, I replied, my fingers trembling. But it has to be discreet. We agreed to meet at a hotel again. A different one this time. More secluded, less polished, but still anonymous enough to feel safe. I told Daniel I had a late client dinner, another excuse in a growing web of lies. He barely looked up from his laptop, murmuring something about heating up leftovers for dinner. When I arrived, Liam was already waiting in the room. He didn't greet me with his usual easy charm. Instead, his expression was serious, almost somber. Hey, I said, closing the door behind me. What's going on? He gestured for me to sit on the edge of the bed. We need to talk, he said. The word sent a chill through me. About what? About us, he said, sitting beside me. Alicia, I can't keep doing this unless I know you're serious. Serious about what? I asked, my voice shaking. About leaving him, Liam said bluntly. About building something real with me. The words hit me like a punch to the gut. I'd known this conversation was coming, but hearing it out loud made it all too real. Liam, I can't just walk away from my life, I said, standing and pacing the room. From my marriage, my home, everything I've built with Daniel. He stood too, his voice calm but firm. Then what are we doing here? If you're not willing to make a change, why keep this going? I turned to face him, my chest tightening. Because you make me feel alive. Because I've spent years feeling invisible, and now I finally feel seen. And I want to keep seeing you, he said, stepping closer. But not like this. Not in secret. I want to give you more than just stolen moments. Tears stung my eyes as I looked at him. I don't know if I can do this, Liam. I don't know if I'm brave enough. He reached out, brushing a tear from my cheek. You don't have to decide tonight, he said softly. But I need to know you're thinking about it. Really thinking about it. The drive home was agonizing. Liam's words echoed in my mind, each one cutting deeper than the last. By the time I pulled into the driveway, my hands were shaking, my heart pounding. Inside, Daniel was still in the living room, a movie playing on the TV. He looked up when I walked in, his face lighting up in a way that made my guilt feel unbearable. Hey, he said, patting the couch beside him. You're back early. Want to watch the rest with me? I hesitated, the weight of my choices pressing down on me. Finally, I sat beside him, my heart breaking as he wrapped an arm around my shoulders. Over the next few days, I threw myself into work, avoiding both Daniel and Liam as much as possible. I needed space to think, to figure out what I really wanted. But the truth was, I didn't know. The life I had with Daniel was safe, stable, familiar. But the life Liam was offering, a life filled with passion and possibility, felt like a dream I wasn't sure I deserved. Then, one evening, as I was sorting through paperwork in my home office, Daniel walked in. He held a piece of paper in his hand, his expression unreadable. "What's this?" he asked, holding it out to me. I froze. It was a receipt from the hotel where I'd met Liam. My stomach dropped as I realized I'd left it in my bag. "I don't know." I lied, my voice trembling. "Probably from a client meeting." He stared at me for a long moment, his eyes searching mine. "Is there something you need to tell me, Alicia?" The room felt like it was spinning. My carefully constructed web of lies was unraveling, and I had no idea how to stop it. Daniel's question hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. My heart pounded in my chest as I scrambled for an answer that wouldn't shatter everything. But the look in his eyes told me he wasn't going to let this slide. He wasn't oblivious anymore. "It's nothing," I said quickly, my voice betraying me with its unsteady tone. "Just a business meeting." I must have forgotten to toss the receipt. "Really?" he asked, his voice low but steady. He held up the receipt again, pointing to the timestamp. "This says 9:30 p.m., Alicia. What kind of real estate meeting happens that late?" My mouth opened, but no words came out. I was caught and we both knew it. "Who is he?" Daniel asked finally, his voice breaking. "I'm not an idiot. Just tell me the truth." I looked away, tears welling in my eyes. "Daniel, it's not what you think." "Don't," he interrupted sharply, his calm demeanor cracking. "Don't lie to me, Alicia. Not now." The truth was burning in my throat, desperate to escape, but I couldn't bring myself to say it. "Not yet." "Please, Daniel," I whispered. "Can we just talk about this?" He stepped back, shaking his head. "What's there to talk about? You've been sneaking around behind my back, lying to me every day. Do you even love me anymore?" The question hit me like a gut punch. "I do," I said, my voice barely audible. "I do love you." "But not enough," he said, his tone bitter. "Not enough to be honest. Not enough to stay faithful." I reached out for him, but he stepped away. "I need some air," he said, his voice hollow. "Don't follow me." And then he was gone, the front door slamming behind him. I stood there in the silence, my heart racing, my mind spinning. The truth was out, or at least part of it, and there was no way to take it back. I spent the next hour pacing the house, my thoughts racing. Daniel hadn't said where he was going or when he'd be back. I wanted to call Liam, to tell him what had happened, but the thought of involving him in the chaos felt like crossing another line I wasn't ready for. Finally, I sank onto the couch, my head in my hands. This was the moment I'd feared since the first time I texted Liam back. The moment when everything I'd worked so hard to protect started crumbling around me. It was nearly midnight when Daniel came back. His face was pale, his eyes red-rimmed like he'd been crying. He didn't say a word as he walked past me into the living room. I followed, my stomach in knots. "Where were you?" I asked softly. "Driving," he said, his voice cold. "Thinking." "Daniel, I'm so sorry." "Save it," he snapped, cutting me off. "I just need to know one thing, Alicia. Is it over?" I hesitated, the weight of the question crushing me. I don't know." He let out a bitter laugh. "You don't know? You've turned our life into a goddamn soap opera, and you don't know?" "I didn't mean for this to happen," I said, my voice trembling. "I never wanted to hurt you. But you did," he said flatly. "And now I have to decide if I can live with that." The rest of the night passed in strained silence. Daniel went to bed without saying another word, leaving me alone with my thoughts. I stared at my phone, Liam's number glowing on the screen, but I couldn't bring myself to call him. Not now. Not yet. As I lay awake, the reality of my choices finally settled over me. I was standing at a crossroads, and no matter which path I chose, someone was going to get hurt. The question was, who? The next morning, Daniel was gone before I woke up. His side of the bed was cold, the sheets neatly tucked like he hadn't slept there at all. I found a note on the kitchen counter in his sharp, precise handwriting. "Alicia, I need some space to think. Staying at my brother's for a few days. Don't call me. Daniel. My chest tightened as I read the words, the weight of them sinking in. He wasn't just angry, he was pulling away, leaving me to stew in the mess I'd made. And I couldn't blame him. By mid-morning, Liam texted, "Is everything okay?" I stared at the message, unsure how to respond. Did I tell him about the confrontation? About Daniel leaving? Or did I keep him at arm's length, protecting him from the fallout? Finally, I replied, "Things are complicated. Can we meet?" We met at his house this time, a sleek, modern place on the edge of town that felt more like a magazine spread than a home. When I walked in, Liam was waiting in the open-plan living room, his expression a mix of concern and determination. "What happened?" he asked as I sank onto the pristine white couch. I told him everything. The receipt, Daniel's questions, his decision to leave. Liam listened silently, his jaw tightening as I spoke. "He's hurt," I said, my voice trembling. "And he has every right to be. I don't know how to fix this." Liam leaned forward, his eyes locking onto mine. "Maybe you can't. Maybe it's time to stop trying to fix something that's already broken." His words sent a chill through me. "Liam, I can't just walk away from him, from my life." "Why not?" he pressed. "Do you really think staying will make things better? That you can go back to pretending everything's fine?" "I don't know," I admitted, tears welling in my eyes. "I don't know what the right thing to do is." He reached for my hand, his grip firm and steady. "The right thing is what makes you happy, Alicia. You deserve that." After leaving Liam's, I drove aimlessly for hours, the weight of his words pressing down on me. He made it sound so simple, like choosing happiness was just a matter of making up my mind. But the reality was so much messier. When I finally went home, the silence of the house was deafening. I wandered from room to room, my footsteps echoing off the walls. Every corner was filled with memories of Daniel, his laugh, his voice, the way he'd hum off-key while washing dishes. The thought of losing all of that, of erasing the life we'd built together, felt unbearable. But then I thought of Liam, of the way he made me feel seen, alive. The way he looked at me like I was the only thing in the world that mattered. And I wondered if I could ever feel that way with Daniel again. That night, I sat at the kitchen table, staring at the divorce papers I'd printed out earlier. I hadn't filled them in yet, hadn't even touched them since setting them down. But they were there, a physical reminder of the decision I had to make. Just as I reached for the pen, my phone buzzed. It was Daniel. "I'm coming home tomorrow," his text read. "We need to talk." The next day, Daniel arrived just after noon. He looked tired, his face drawn and pale. He set his bag down by the door, but didn't move to embrace me. "Hi," I said, my voice small. "Hi," he replied, his tone clipped. We sat at the kitchen table, the same table where I'd spent hours agonizing over those divorce papers. Daniel's hands were clasped in front of him, his wedding ring catching the light. "I've been thinking," he began, his voice steady but cold, "about us. About everything." I nodded, my heart pounding. "I want to try," he said finally. "But if we're going to make this work, I need the truth. All of it. No more lies, Alicia." The room felt like it was spinning. "Daniel, Who is he?" he interrupted, his eyes boring into mine. "I deserve to know." I took a deep breath, the words clawing their way out of my throat. "His name is Liam. He's a client, but it became more." Daniel flinched, like I'd struck him. "How long?" "Not long," I said quickly. "It's not. I mean, it wasn't serious." He laughed bitterly. "Not serious? You risked everything for something that wasn't serious?" I was lost, I said, tears streaming down my face. I didn't know how to tell you how unhappy I was. "And now," he asked, his voice cracking, "do you want to be with him? Or with me?" I hesitated, the weight of the question suffocating me. "I don't know," I whispered. "I don't know what I want." Daniel stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. "Then figure it out," he said, his voice trembling with anger and pain. "Because I'm not going to wait around while you decide if I'm worth it." He grabbed his bag and walked out the door, leaving me alone in the silence once again. That night, I called Liam. I told him everything, I said, my voice shaking. He left. There was a long pause on the other end. "I'm here," Liam said finally. "Whenever you're ready." But the question was, would I ever be ready? The days after Daniel left were a blur of silence and second-guessing. I'd expected some clarity after telling him the truth, but all I felt was a growing weight in my chest. I avoided both Daniel and Liam, ignoring their texts and calls as I tried to sort through the wreckage of my choices. Then, a week later, everything came crashing down. It was a Wednesday evening when the knock came at the door. I wasn't expecting anyone. Daniel had gone radio silent, and Liam hadn't contacted me in days. My stomach tightened as I opened the door, only to find Daniel standing there, his face a mixture of exhaustion and resolve. "We need to talk," he said, stepping inside without waiting for an invitation. "Daniel, I started, but he cut me off." "Save it," he snapped. "I've heard enough excuses. I didn't come here to argue. I came here to tell you what I've decided." My chest tightened. "What do you mean?" He crossed his arms, his gaze hard. "You're not the only one who's been exploring options," he said, his voice laced with bitterness. My heart dropped. "What are you talking about?" Daniel pulled out his phone and held it up, showing me a photo, a grainy but unmistakable image of Liam and me outside the boutique hotel. My stomach turned as I realized someone must have seen us and taken the picture. "Who sent this to you?" I asked, my voice shaking. He smirked bitterly. "That's the funny part. Liam's wife did." The words hit me like a freight train. His wife. Daniel nodded, his expression cold. "Oh, you didn't know? He's married. And from what she told me, you're not the first special project he's taken on." I staggered back, the room spinning. "That's not true. Liam, he wouldn't." "Wake up, Alicia," Daniel said harshly. "He played you, just like he's played other women. You're not special to him. You're just convenient." Tears streamed down my face as I tried to process his words. "Why didn't you tell me this sooner?" "Because I wanted to see how far you'd go," he said coldly. "I wanted to see if you'd actually destroy everything we built for a man who couldn't even be honest with you." I sank onto the couch, my head in my hands. "Daniel, I'm so sorry." "Stop," he said, his voice sharp. "I don't want your apologies. I want you to listen." I looked up at him, my heart pounding. "This is how it's going to go," he said. "You're going to end things with him. Completely. And then we're going to sell this house, split everything, and move on with our lives. Separately." My breath hitched. "You're divorcing me? What else is there to do?" he asked bitterly. "You don't love me, and I can't spend the rest of my life wondering if you're going to betray me again." The next morning, I confronted Liam. I showed up at his office unannounced, my heart pounding as I stormed past his assistant and into his private office. He looked up, startled, as I slammed the photo Daniel had shown me onto his desk. "What the hell is this?" I demanded, my voice shaking with anger. Liam's face darkened as he took in the photo. "Alicia, let me explain." "Explain what?" I snapped. "That you're married? That I was just another notch on your belt?" "It's not like that," he said, standing. "My marriage is over, Alicia. We're separated." "Bullshit," I spat. "Your wife sent this to my husband. She told him everything. You've been lying to me this whole time." He stepped closer, his expression pleading. "Alicia, please. I never meant to hurt you. I care about you." "Save it," I said, my voice breaking. "I gave up everything for you. My marriage, my home, everything. And you couldn't even tell me the truth." He reached for me, but I stepped back, my heart breaking. "We're done," I said firmly. "Don't ever contact me again." The fallout was swift and brutal. Daniel filed for divorce the next day, citing infidelity. Word of the affair spread quickly, thanks to Liam's wife, who wasted no time sharing the details with anyone who would listen. My reputation in the real estate community took a massive hit, and I lost several high-profile clients. Liam tried to reach out, but I blocked his number. I couldn't bear to hear his excuses, to be reminded of the life I'd almost thrown away for him. In the end, I was left with nothing but regret and the hollow ache of a life I couldn't piece back together. Months later, as I packed up the last of my things from the house Daniel and I had shared, I found a note tucked into one of the drawers. It was in Daniel's handwriting, and it simply read, "You had everything, Alicia, and you let it slip away." Tears streamed down my face as I folded the note and slipped it into my pocket. He was right. I'd made my choice, and now I had to live with it. As I drove away from the house for the last time, I realized that the life I destroyed wasn't just my marriage or my career. It was the person I used to be. And no amount of passion, no fleeting thrill, could ever replace that.
Thanks for watching, and don't forget to like and subscribe. New cheating wife stories tomorrow. Goodbye.